It's Manga Day. Today we're going to talk about manga. It's a... What? So it's a book about manga. It's not actually manga. Okay, roll the clip. Wait. 1 second. Guess what? Our graphic novel is out. You can buy it at Comixology or at Gumroad. The link's below. Check it out.
So today we're going to look at this book by Hirohiko Araki, Manga in Theory and Practice. Now, if the name Hirohiko Araki is familiar, he is known for the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure series. These are all foreign editions because this storyline that I was collecting, Stone Ocean, is not available translated in the US. So I've got a Japanese and a couple French versions here. But I was hoping this book was going to be similar to Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, but a manga version, because I'm very interested in how they see things, different than how Western comics are made. But unfortunately, it's very one man's opinion. It's not like grand in scope, kind of how Understanding Comics is. This book, Manga in Theory and Practice, is just mostly what Hirohiko thinks and how he makes manga. Let me just look through it, see kind of some interesting things. Now, the new JoJo books that are coming out slowly here in America by Viz all kind of have a similar design motif, so that's why this looks like this, which is quite good looking in my opinion. One interesting thing I found in reading this book is he doesn't mention assistants. Often in Japanese manga, mangaka will use assistants for backgrounds or for things they don't necessarily have the time to draw, but it seems he does everything himself unless he's keeping it on the low. He talks about the Golden Way, which is his kind of philosophy on making manga. It kind of follows some rules that he's kind of created for himself over the years. JoJo is a manga of the Royal Road. A lot of the references in this book, I don't like. They haven't been released in America or the West, so some of his references when he's trying to when he's comparing different styles or he's trying to make a point, a lot of it kind of falls it's kind of pointless because we don't get the reference. He stresses things like creating the first page. A lot of the focus of this book is hooking the reader, because from what I gather, manga is highly competitive. So, and the audience's attentions are a lot of people competing for their attention. So there's things that he feels he has to do to stick out of the pack. I mean, he stresses here finding a compelling title for the manga as one of the things. I agree with that to a sense, but I mean, in Western manga we have a lot of, not Western manga, Western comics, we have a lot of just kind of titles, one-word titles. Just kind of like ho-hum. And I guess I'm sure it's the same in Japan as well. But, talks about what makes good dialogue. Kind of gives an example. 5 W's and 1 H. He thinks in the first panel, you should illustrate the 5 W's and 1 H, which is the who, where, what, why, when. And the last one's how. The H is how. Basically, he's trying to say set up as much as possible. The first page, first panel. it's the manga's preview, as he says. He recommends checking out manga and finding out what territory has been spoken for. So here, an early his debut work was a western. I mean, this is kind of one of the interesting things is like the notes that he gives to on his own work. I'd appreciate it if the book had more of this kind of notes on his own work. Kind of short paragraph on how to make him read to the end. So he has these, what he believes are the 4 pillars of like manga structure: character, story, setting, and themes. He puts them in order. He believes character is the most important, story, setting, and theme. Theme ties them all together. It's least important, but he says you can have a good, well, he uses the word successful manga if it's got good characters, but a poor story. Setting, he says, is also indispensable. He believes in balance the 4 elements. Designing characters, he has kind of breaks down a golden way of making protagonists. I mean, a lot of these things are rules that I feel like can be broken. And he says as much at the beginning and end of the book, like, hey, you can disagree with me. This is just his way of doing things. But a lot of, I think, his view on making manga is the highly competitive nature of Japanese manga, where you've got to hook the reader's attention, hold on to it. He goes on the whole thing about characters, and it should be familiar to anyone who's ever done any kind of writing workshops where you kind of break down who your characters are, their backstories, stuff like that. 60 facts to flesh out your characters, stuff like that. He does kind of ring the bell a bunch of this on the third JoJo arc, which is Stardust Crusaders, which is the ones that stars Jotaro. He kind of goes on a couple times in this book about how it was his kind of biggest success, where it all kind of gelled for him. And it makes sense. Shotaro's a popular character. He's probably the most recognizable of the JoJo Bizarre Adventure characters. But he's only the main character of one arc, really. So he has this idea of stories getting in the way, that the character should come first. But he also has what he believes is a protagonist always rises. Like, at no point does he feels in successful manga. He uses the word successful again rather than good. Or he often talks about how the character's always rising. The character's always ascending. At no point does he lose a battle. Like, because if the character, for example, loses his powers, like in, say, that one Wolverine movie, it's a bummer because we all know he's going to get his powers back. So it's if you want to kind of not disappoint the readership, you got to give the character at his full potential, always growing all the time, not losing. There are challenges that this represents challenges he's up against the whole way here, and he beats every challenge. He says like you can do the opposite. Like, I think gives the example of The Walking Dead, how kind of like things can go negative, but that's a different type of story. He mostly talks about this is how to do successful shonen manga, which is boys manga. Where he shows like he says not good for where character succeeds and then either stagnates or kind of takes a step back, then rises again. Like he says it's pointless because the reader knows the protagonist is always going to come out on the end. So the best thing to do is to give him challenges that he can beat. pretty much throughout the rest of the book, he kind of talks about that tournament structure. The way he says he got around it, he says he kind of learned the first arc of JoJo. He had it where a character started out in a negative position, situation, and it kind of got worse and worse and worse. And he said he was scared of losing the readership, but he kind of righted the ship, and he kind of got the problem with the tournament structure, the limits of the tournament structure, is that after you beat the boss or the head of the tournament, the most powerful opponent, where do you go from there? He gets around it by resetting the timeline every time. So because each arc in JoJo stars a different member of the Joestar family, starting with Jonathan, going on to Joseph and Jotaro. That's how he gets around it, by restarting the arc with new characters each time. He also says he started getting kind of stale. So what he did instead of the tournament style, it wasn't an increasing challenge of enemies. It was like what he called board game style, where the the challenges the protagonist would face would not necessarily always be the strongest, but different in some way. Requiring some different type of way of defeating the enemy, or it could be weaker enemies, but just they were defeated a different type of way. I mean, it's just interesting, but he basically lays down a formula for shonen manga. Don't fall in the temptation to go negative. Again, he kind of, the trap of going back to zero. Story taboos, kind of bugaboos he has. It was all a dream. Protagonist messed up. Coincidences. Breaking the fourth wall. It's weird. He talks about not seeking reality and entertainment, but also talks about grounding things in reality. He goes on to talk about, to that point, he believes that Boa, which is Bao. Anyways, this particular comic he believed wasn't successful because he didn't depict a certain train line realistically. Like, people who were familiar with this train line that he depicted knew that, I guess, it didn't have electric rails over it, or that it was a 2-rail line instead of just the one set of tracks. And he believed that's why this particular manga wasn't successful for him. And I just kind of think, maybe it's true. Like, he says, it pulled readers out because it obviously wasn't realistic. And I don't know, I kind of think that's ridiculous. Maybe Japanese cultures scrutinizes realism a lot more, but even if I lived in a particular place, I wouldn't necessarily need a particular detail to be exact in order to understand it, in order to relate to the characters, to relate to the. It's a small detail in the grander scale of things. All these fantastical elements, boy turning into a demon, but anyways, back to kind of what he goes on about. Talks about why he killed Jonathan Joestar, and he kind of goes back to kind of talking about having to end it in some way. Talks about setting up a suspenseful story. A lot of this is if you've read Understanding Comics, or you've read anything, about comic book writing or comic book theory, none of this will be new to you. It's only interesting through the lens of Japanese. That this is how they do it. This is how this one particular mangaka does it. He says, interestingly enough, he says when he's reviewing kind of like other artists' work, if a gun doesn't look realistic to him, it takes him out of it completely. So he needs to know, like a gun that he's looking at can operate within reason, which is bizarre to me, considering how much science fiction out there is, ray guns and large cannons and stuff. He's definitely a weird sort. I mean, also the book touches on things like how to draw fire, water, air, light. It's kind of this weird kind of philosophy. It's almost philosophical the way his approach to it. Water. How does the water splash? When a cup breaks, how does the liquid spill out? Air drawing lines of motion towards the viewpoint. Fire equals drawing wind. And he gives some examples. I mean, the wind stuff makes sense. The fire is a little hard for me to grasp. The water is interesting. See, drawing gravity, show where the water has pooled and where it is flowing. I mean, you're looking at boobs anyway, so first of all, there's a major distraction. She could be sitting in a tub of oatmeal. But yeah, I don't see how that's an example. It almost seems philosophical. He believes the paper is more important than the pen when drawing. He still draws analog. He still uses paper rather than digital. Talks about the Hamon and stands in JoJo's to kind of express how to make the invisible visible, how to make things like power and movement and weight visible. His trick around that was making the Hamon, which is, if you've ever seen the JoJo cartoon or played the video games, and stands or stances. Talks about Domu here, A Child's Dream. It's Otomo's work if you're not familiar. Talks about it's about psychic powers, extrasensory powers. He could clearly sense the unseen energy of that powerful destructive force. It's kind of something he kind of harps on, kind of drawing the unseen, drawing the hard to express. Yeah, he goes on to talk about where Bao failed. He thinks it's the train. I don't think it was the train. It's probably just not the right thing. He goes on to talk about how theme connects the four major fundamentals that he talked about. I think this is an interesting part here. He breaks down his process. He goes from idea note cards to a sketchbook where he sketches out some ideas and meets with before he meets with his editor. Script, panel layout, and pages. It seems in the Japanese manga culture, there's this barrier to entry. There's like this barrier to being allowed to make your work, and that seems to be the editor. Many times in this, he mentions, the role of what the editor has said or feels, or advice he has been given. There's very much some gatekeeping happening by what gets released and whatnot, and it's I guess because it's ultra competitive. But this is interesting. He kind of breaks down what happens on note cards. That's how he breaks down his story. Talks about he doesn't know how necessarily the story ends when he starts working on it. Like, he has a destination in mind. It's great to see that his breakdowns are even worse looking than mine. I mean, look at that. He's got like a destination in mind, but he doesn't know necessarily how it gets there as he's writing it, which is kind of similar to how I work. I try to take it kind of one chunk at a time. I know where the end game is, kind of, the how to get there. I have to work through. I have to draw through it. I can't just write it all out completely and then draw it. I have to draw and work things out on the page. He goes on to it does a little quick small chapter on how to do a one-off story compared. And it mostly because it's different. His approach to doing a one-off story differs from a continuing series. But yeah, it's interesting. It's not quite the kind of big manga theory book I think I was hoping for, but it's still pretty good. As speaking of which, my book is out. If you want to purchase this, it's really cool. It's almost 200 some pages of crazy, weird nonsense. You can purchase this either digital or physical at Gumroad. The link below here on the screen, I'll put it right here, and also in the comments. Follow me on Twitter at PlagueChild and at Instagram at Octopus Avenue. Alright, have a good week.
Tonight's program has been brought to you by